Okay.
You're hearing the Echoes podcast. Coming up, we're going to explore the legacy of Close to the Edge by Yes. We'll talk to author Will Romano about how this Yes classic defined prog rock and have some comments by Yes members. Before we do that, I want to remind you that Echoes podcasts are free, but it takes a lot of money to put them together. Think about what other podcasts are interviewing people like Jean-Michel Jarre, Mike Oldfield, Jane Sibrey, and Enigma. And so, if you're into it, subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, and if you're really into it, make a donation to Echoes or become a sustaining member. You can do it all at echoes.org. That's echoes, echoes.org. O-R-G. And now, watch your step as we go close to the edge. You're hearing Echoes, and I'm John DiLiberto. On April 7th, Yes will become only the fourth progressive rock group inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, joining previous inductees Pink Floyd, Genesis, and Rush. So what better time to reappraise this enduring band and its long legacy? Author Will Romano does a bit of that with his new book, Close to the Edge, How Yes's Masterpiece Defined Prog Rock. Romano had previously written Mountains Come Out of the Sky, the illustrated history of progressive rock. That book takes its title from the Yes hit Roundabout, so you might assume that Romano is something of a Yes freak. His Close to the Edge book is nothing if not obsessive.
There were days when I literally would listen to the records over and over again, 5-6 times a day for days on end. Not only would I play Close to the Edge in the car, Close to the Edge at home, I would pull up Close to the Edge on the iTunes. I'd block out 2 or 3 seconds of time and try to listen to what I was hearing on literally a per second basis.
Will Romano was immersing himself in Yes's 45-year-old album that contained just 3 long songs. Released at the height of progressive rock, it was the 5th album by Yes, and they were in the thick of a movement that included Emerson, Lake and Palmer, King Crimson, and Genesis. They all had multiple albums out, but for Romano, Close to the Edge by Yes was the definitive release.
This idea of a symphonic rock band, I think that's what the progressives were kind of chasing. They wanted that sound, hence the use of mellotrons and whatnot. They were sort of chasing that sound, a sort of symphonic rock sound. I think it kind of reached its pinnacle with Close to the Edge, frankly.
Progressive rock was the music of virtuosos, and Yes had that in spades.
You have a virtuoso guitarist, if you will, virtuoso drummer, keyboardist. You also had a virtuoso bassist.
Yes drummer Bill Bruford speaking to me in 1987.
At the time, it was a good opportunity to indicate that pop didn't have to be only about playing the instrument simply. You could also play it in other ways too. It didn't have to be Jan and Dean. There were other ways of using drum sets and things. So I think in that sense it was very good.
Chris Squire was not only a monster player, he forged a singular conception of lead bass.
I think Chris Squire was able to do two things. He was able to keep down the bottom end and also put his signature on these tracks by almost being sort of a lead sort of bassist.
Yes, personnel has shifted over the years, but at this time the band was Bill Bruford and Chris Squire, along with keyboardist Rick Wakeman, guitarist Steve Howe, and vocalist John Anderson. Anderson also wrote most of the cosmic lyrics. Romano reports that the singer was deep into Hermann Hesse's book Siddhartha at the time.
I think because Siddhartha talked so much about a individual who finds his own sort of spiritual enlightenment, who finds himself shedding his secular being, if you will, and having a sort of spiritual life. I think John connected with that somehow.
I listened hard but could not see. Like tempo change out and inside me. The preacher training on to lose his name. The teacher travels asking to be shown the same. In the end we'll agree, we'll accept, we'll immortalize. That the truth of the man maturing in his eyes.
That explanation may not make total sense of John Anderson's lyrics, but maybe sometimes they don't make sense. Words are there for their sounds.
He stressed the sound of words more than their, let's say, literal definition.
It's something John Anderson was still doing when I spoke to him in 2007.
Sort of thing, you know. And that's what I just enjoy doing it, you know.
And I think that you're seeing that on full display here with things like Siberian True and some of the wordplay that's happening.
Among the accomplishments of Close to the Edge was the synthesis of several music strains into a coherent symphonic form. On the one hand, you have Rick Wakeman playing classical riffs on keyboards, and Gothic organ choirs on a real Gothic organ. But you also have Steve Howe playing a sitar guitar on much of the album.
Because of coming out of the psychedelic movement, there was a lot of this sort of Eastern, if you will, Indian, even African these motifs, this sort of slant.
You can't talk about Yes without talking about Roger Dean, the artist who created most of their covers, John Anderson.
I think Roger's very sort of unique in the sense that he's there's a lot of surreal energy about his art, and he's very careful with his color, but he has a very strong sort of sci-fi imagination that he wants to build houses and places that match what he can see in his mind's eye. He'd love to bring that to the earth space, I know that.
Close to the Edge was a gatefold album, and the outer cover was one of Dean's simplest, a shading of emerald green from dark to light. It was all highlighting his newly designed and now iconic Yes logo. Speaking in 2007, Roger Dean.
And I suppose there was a sort of arrogance in it that I was so pleased with the way the Yes logo looked, which was the first time it was ever used. I thought that would be intriguing enough on the cover.
But when you open the cover, there was one of Dean's fantasy worlds, like a Grand Canyon in space, its vast expanse reflecting the music.
I quite liked the idea of something opening up, something that looked significant from the outside, and you opened up into a new world. I love that idea and that process. Obviously, it's a book-like thing to do that. Something contained in a book, a mystery, a world, a story, whatever. So I like the idea of opening up into that.
Close to the Edge remains one of Yes's two signature albums. The other one is the follow-up, Tales from Topographic Oceans. Shortly after recording Close to the Edge, Bill Bruford left the band for what he thought were more adventurous pastures with King Crimson. But in retrospect, he acknowledges Close to the Edge as a landmark work.
And I must admit that on the big hit, Close to the Edge, I think something happened on that album which was above the music. It was very good. And it was a good album, and it was recognized as such by the audience. I have great faith in the audience that somehow they do pick out good things. You know, the classic albums are classic for a good reason, I think. And that is a classic album.
Coming quickly to terms of all expression made. Emotion revealed as the ocean made. As the movement regained and regarded both the same. Oh, complete in the sight of seasoned life with you.
Close to the Edge turns 45 on September 13th, and Yes is inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame on April 7th. Lou Romano's exhaustive book, Close to the Edge, How Yes's masterpiece defined prog rock, is out on Backbeat Books. Thanks for tuning in to the Echoes podcast today. Go to echoes.org to find out more. I'm John DiLiberto. Be sure to keep an eye out for more Echoes interviews at echoes.org or the Echoes newsletter.